Hey everyone, it's Justine and welcome to a new video. Today we're going to be talking about 10 ways how you can make cards in just a few minutes that are going to speed up your crafting. So let's jump right into the video and get started. The first thing I recommend, and it might seem pretty obvious, is to pre-cut your card bases and card panels. So think about the cardstock that you use most. For me, it's Neenah Solar White in 8.5 by 11. And all I do is just simply cut it in half. So at 5.5 inches, just put a cut down the center, and I'm able to score them when I'm all finished. And sometimes I'll sit down at the end of an evening and just cut some card bases, or I'll cut some panels, which involves cutting them in half this way, and then the opposite way to get some 4 by 5.25 panels. And that way I'm able to get the cardstock that I need so I can work on my card bases and my card fronts and just have everything ready to go when I craft. My second tip is to use large word dies in your crafting. For example, this large thanks die. I like to use dies like this because it covers the entire card. It creates its own focal point. So you can go ahead, you could cut this out of some specialty paper like this glitter paper, for example. You can cut it out of some colored cardstock. You could use some acetate. It's just completely up to you how you want to do it. You just want to shove it through your die cutting machine, mount it on top of a card front, and you're good to go. Now I'm also going to build off of this technique and talk about some simple score lines. So whether or not you have a paper trimmer that has a scoring feature or you have a scoreboard, it's completely up to you. You can go ahead and put some lines in your cardstock that create some amazing texture, and it's a really simple and elegant way to get a very beautiful look without having to spend a lot of money. And you could do, of course, horizontal lines, vertical lines, diagonal lines, crisscross patterns. It really is endless possibilities, and it's a great way to keep your cards clean and simple. For this card here, I measured them at 1/2 inch each way, and then I just simply went ahead and mounted that large die cut that we had cut out in the previous technique on top. So again, a really classy, clean and simple look with some very simple details, just adding some glitter cardstock and some simple score lines. You can take a closer look up here, and in the light you can really see those score lines. The next technique that you could use are background stamps. These are going to be your best friends for quick cards. Today I'm using this Kaleidoscope background from Catherine Pooler Designs, and I'm just inking it up using some black ink. So I'm now going to lay my cardstock on top once my ink is all over, and then I'm going to grab a scrap piece of paper, lay it on top, and just push my cardstock into the stamp. This is how I personally like to stamp my background stamps rather than mounting them in my Misti or trying to stamp on top, as sometimes they're quite heavy so they might fall off a block. And so I like to do it this way, and then the only thing you got to make sure is that you lift it up really carefully. I'm using a pick here to give me a hand, and you can see just how gorgeous that background turned out. You can go ahead and pair a large die on the top of that if you'd like, and then you have a card already completed in just a couple of minutes, like this Thinking of You die from Altenew. So here's a final look at that card there. Very simple black and white cards. Also a really great way to get a nice look in minutes. This stamp here is a stamp that is what I call a standalone stamp. It's meant to be stamped the 2 floral areas. You can choose your sentiment to go in the center, and you can make this as detailed or as simple as you want. I like to call these standalone stamps because you really don't need anything else with this product in order to make a beautiful card. So I'm going to go ahead and lay down the 2 floral banners, choose a sentiment for the center, stamp it, and it's all said and done. This stamp here is called the Whimsical Wildflower frame stamp from Gina Designs, and I also like the fact that I could mount this right now, or I can do the most insane blending and coloring and put tons of work into it. So it's one of those stamps that's perfect for beginners and people who want to improve on their coloring, because you can go ahead and start by simple stamping, you could emboss this, or you could go ahead and color it completely. I have a whole video up of standalone stamps that you can create cards in a few minutes, and I will link that up above as well as the video in description below. The next one, and I've done this technique several times, is creative layering. So I'm going to be using the Morning Glory stamp from Altenew, and I'm going to be using a 6x6 piece of cardstock here. I am going to speed you up. I'm using 4 colors of pink. I'm using It's a Girl, Be Mine, Party Dress, and Samba. from Catherine Pooler Designs, and I'm going to go ahead and stamp this normally in the Misti, but this time I'm going to actually take my cardstock and rotate it 90 degrees each time until it's all finished. I've now created 4 different stamps in just a couple of minutes, and I'm really getting the most of my time when doing this layering technique. Going now in with the Be Mine, I'm going to stamp layer number 2 over top of all 4 of them. You'll notice by using the stamping tool that I'm using here that I don't need to readjust my stamp every time. I just ink up and stamp in each spot. And I could of course add a second piece of 6x6 cardstock and stamp 8 of them, or 3 pieces for 12, completely up to you. Going in with layer number 3 with the Be Mine, and then lastly with the Samba ink. This took me a second here to line up. But I'm going now in with my 4th layer and finishing off the flowers. Now I can go ahead and die cut them and be ready to go with a nice cluster. So you could choose if you wanted to use one of these for a card and make 4 different cards. You could cluster them all together onto one card. It's completely up to you. I decided here to use an odd amount of flowers, so I decided on 3, and then I'm going to go ahead and just add a sentiment on the bottom here just to finish off my card. Again, a card that was done relatively quickly considering it's a layering stamp and getting the most out of your time. So just finishing up the card here, I decided to stamp it with a Happy Mother's Day. Because of you, I am me, and I'll have this all ready to go for next year or to give to a friend. So here's a final look at that pretty card, and you could of course go into more detail by adding something in the middle or maybe a glitter pen over top, completely up to you. My next technique here requires some watercolor paper, a spray bottle, and some shimmer powders. Color burst also work, or any sort of pigment that works on this. This is a powder meant for watercolor. And again, using watercolor cardstock because I am going to be spraying it and saturating it with water. So I'm just choosing my colors. These are the Nouveau Shimmer Powders. I'm going to be using some of the gold color here, this yellow. And I wanted to use the less textured side for this card, so I'm just sprinkling some of the powder here on top, adding some of the blue, and then going in with another couple of colors. And you just need to add powder on top, and you could always add more later if you're unsatisfied with the look. So just adding a little bit of gold now to this here, and then I'm going to go ahead and spritz it with some water, and you're going to see the magic happen, and the colors are going to start to burst and spread. Now the more water you add, the less formed the bursts look, and the more of a watercolor look that you're going to get. And as I said, if you're unsatisfied with the look, you can go in and add more water. You could go ahead and add in more powder, completely up to you. You could also hold it up and down to get the colors to really start flowing together, or you can even use your finger if there's any areas of white that you missed. Just go ahead and give it a shot with the heat gun so that it dries up nicely and you're all set. I decided to pair this card up with this beautiful Happy Birthday script die from My Favorite Things, and then I'm all finished. So again, just a large die cut over top of a beautiful background is simple enough for me. You can get a really nice look at the shimmer it has on it. It has almost a pearlescent look when it's all finished, and I love how it still has those grains of pigment there. Another thing that you can do is you can use watercolor cardstock. This one here is a pre-embossed look that I have from Concord and 9th, but you could go ahead, take a background stamp, emboss it in white, and then do this technique yourself. No need to buy the pre-embossed ones. And all I'm doing is I saturated the cardstock with some water. I'm using a wet brush, and I'm just going back and forth. And I don't have a cup here of water with me, so I'm just going ahead and spraying it. And I'm using just a gradient pattern to do a watercolor wash. It's a really easy way to create a beautiful background. As long as you can go back and forth with a watercolor brush or a paintbrush, you can do this technique. Just keep in mind which colors make brown when mixing together, and then you'll be able to avoid those. I paired this up with the beautiful Hello script die from Concord and 9th. I love the chunky font of this one. And now that one's all finished, and you can see that emboss resist look just shining right through. My next one here, I am going to use a piece of 2-inch adhesive from scrapbook.com. Scrapbook.com has so many different types of this adhesive, from 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, 1 inch, 2 inch, 4 inch, 6 inch, and then you can get whatever amount you want. And they're about 80 feet long, so you get a ton of adhesive in one roll. And this is called Adhere Emboss technique, and I have been using in my new technique class, which I have linked to below if you haven't joined yet. I actually did a week of embossing powders and embossing techniques, and I decided to go ahead and swatch my embossing powders, and there were a 4 different embossing powders that I hadn't used yet. The Confetti pack from Catherine Pooler and Wow, and also this one here, the 101, like 101 Dalmatians kind of. And it's a really thick embossing powder that I like to use with this type of adhesive because it is a really thick one. So it actually melts and it has all these different colors in it and it looks so cool when it's all done. These are some embossing powders you have to get your hands on because they're just super cool. Here's a look at the confetti pack. The pink, the orange, and the blue all come in a trio pack of embossing powders, and they look so fun when they're melted onto die cuts. So now I'm just going to go ahead and just take off the powder here, any excess. I'm just going to run my fingers over on any areas that have some stray embossing powder, and I'm going to go ahead and melt this. Now I'm going to keep you up nice and close so you can see how this melts, and the longer you keep it on there, just make sure it doesn't burn, obviously, your paper, and keep moving your embossing or your heat tool, the more it's going to melt into each other. And when it starts to melt, the black and the white are just mixing together like 101 Dalmatians. It's just so cool. I absolutely love it. And the teal, orange, and the pink ones also contain some silver and white in them, as well as the pigment color. So they just turned out to be so neat when it was all melted. When it was all said and done, I decided to just pair this up with a sentiment here. And the sentiment is actually quite large. And it says, even after all this time, you are still you, I am still me, and we are still us, forever in love. And I absolutely love that sentiment. I think it's really pretty for the inside of the card or the outside of a card here if you have a lot of white space. So moving on now to the final technique here. This is just some plain embossing. So again, using kind of a standalone stamp. You want a stamp that has a lot of good detail, that covers up a good portion of your card. So whether that be a background, a floral cluster, or a large sentiment, it's completely up to you. But you want to just put this onto your cardstock and heat emboss it in a beautiful color. So just using some Versamark ink to go along for the heat embossing. I'm just inking this up, stamping it onto my card. I'm going to be using some gold embossing powder today to do this particular technique. And I'm going to be using the Gilded Sparkle. This is a new embossing powder from Brutus Monroe. And what I like about it is it's not only gold embossing powder, but it also has a bit of a glitter shine to it. So it's not that antique gold, it's a really bright gold. And I always find that so many different types of gold embossing powder are out there, and they all have these different shades that, to me, it just justifies investing in another one because they're all just so beautiful when they're all said and done. You can also go ahead and stamp that floral as well as the sentiment all together to truly just make a card in a couple of minutes. Super simple, easy, but perfect card for that. So I hope you enjoyed all 10 techniques today on how you can get the most out of your cards and make cards in minutes. I hope you'll be inspired to try some of these techniques on your cards, especially if you're someone that takes a long time or maybe avoids crafting because you're afraid of the time it's going to take up. These are some perfect tips for you. Thanks so much for watching. Be sure to check out the suggested video and subscribe to my channel. Bye for now.